Hi.
Patti.
Hi, Patti. Hi, Gail.
Hi. Is my audio okay? Or should I put on a headset?
I think you're okay, and actually, I'd love to take mine off. I'll try and you see if it's okay.
I'm okay. I'm worried putting it on because my iPod batteries are draining in a half an hour, and I'm kind of worried about in the middle of it having to.
How's my audio with the headset off? Am I okay?
I don't hear any echo. Patti?
No, it sounds fine.
Okay.
You're a little bit faint, Patti, on your mic.
Oh, really? Okay. Maybe I should take mine off.
Maybe.
There's Angie. She can tell us. And Karen, I didn't put my badge on because
That's fine.
It leaves holes.
No problem. I'm in the office, so being here, I have it on. So.
Hi, Angie.
Hello, how are you guys? Or how are you ladies?
Great.
Good.
Doing well, thanks for joining us. So I'm just simply your Zoom host. And I'm just here to make sure Zoom works for all of us. And to enjoy a really good session.
There you go.
And I think, so Gail, I think you and I, Patti, of course I know. Gail, I think you and I have met along the way. But Karen, I don't think I've met you before. Oh, you were here last year, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm just catching up, kind of going from event to event. That's great. That's great.
So.
And from a Zoom perspective, just to kind of handle any details here, are you, is there a presentation? Are you screen sharing? Is there anything else that I need to know? Oh, you've made
conversation from us.
Okay, great. And Patti, you are moderating, right?
No, I'm not. I'm actually on the panel now, and Megan is moderating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that just got switched yesterday.
Okay, great. So then really, I just can be in the background making sure there's no Zoom issues. Perfect.
Exactly.
Great. I'm actually going to just mute myself just so that I can continue to hear the main feed there. But you guys are, and you can keep chatting, but you guys don't need anything from me?
Just a question on the chat. So I have the chat open. If there's questions, will Megan pull from there, or how does that work?
Typically, if she's moderating, that's how we've been doing the other sessions. Is she'll kind of keep her eye on that, and she's a pro. She'll keep her eye on that, and may or may not, choose to bring it in from the chat. And she'll just be coming right over here because she's introducing this. So I was going to say we can ask her, but we'll pretty much be live when she comes. So
okay.
Yeah. And having said that, if you saw something in the chat and it fit, feel free to do that, but she'll specifically be watching that.
Okay.
Good stuff. Well, I'll let you guys keep chatting, and I'm going to pay attention over here for a minute.
Awesome.
Karen, I did redo those notes, so I'm just going to send them to you.
Okay.
Kind of a mess, but
okay.
Do you know, that is the first time in I don't know how long, like years, that I've lost a document. It's not in the autosave, it's not anywhere.
It's weird, hey?
Well, when I did a search, I suspect what happened is I saved it in some obscure place and the search isn't finding it, but yeah, anyway. It happens. It is what it is. Okay. Oh, we have people coming already.
We've got quite a few registered, so looks good. Actually, Jeff Dyer is supposed to be on here too, so that'll be somebody that maybe we can bring into the conversation.
Great. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Chris, Chris, something's wrong with your volume. It's like on hyperspeed.
So Gail, how long have you been on the board for WINS?
Since, what is it, Karen, May, June?
April, actually.
Oh, okay. So you're brand new.
Pretty much, yes. I'm still learning.
I bet.
Yeah, it's a great organization, but there is a lot going on, and so that makes it just makes the learning a little bit more challenging, I guess.
Yeah, it's a busy time in the sector for sure. Lots of changes, and yeah,
Mm.
willing or unwilling, they're happening. So
Right, right. And I'm on the Calgary Co-op board as well, which is going through its own machinations. So
well,
it's very
the
interesting.
CEO spoke last year at the Soul and talked about his vision for co-op, and I see it happening as I shop now. So interesting times for sure.
It is. Lots of market challenges, and COVID has had its positive impact, but the petroleum business is just a disaster because of
Yeah,
the prices, right? They're so low.
yeah,
So yeah, and obviously it's a highly competitive market too. So I shouldn't say a disaster, but it's certainly not what it used to be. So there's been many different challenges, and the cannabis business is doing well.
really. Well, there you go. Cannabis and liquor, right? So
Both did very well in COVID.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a bit concerning. I think the addiction rates have gone up quite substantially too. So it's a
yeah, um yeah, I think being legal, because of course I was part of AGLC when we went through the legalization process, so we did a lot around harm reduction, for lack of a better term,
mm,
and some of it's transferred, and it's being tracked now in a different way.
okay.
So yeah, but yeah, psychiatric problems are certainly an issue from my understanding.
Yeah.
But unlike alcohol, nobody's actually died from cannabis. So it's impossible to overdose. So
Yeah.
you can overdose and have bad response, but you're not likely to die. It's never been documented.
Hmm.
Yeah, but you can die from just about any other drug, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Can you hear me better now?
That's much better.
So I would like to take issue with you, Gail. My wife's brother committed suicide. He was schizophrenic, and they feel that cannabis was a large factor in his death.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's issues like that, and can be directly tied back. Yeah, absolutely. Not saying it's harmless. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah. 2 minutes still.
Hmm.
And just wondering, do you want me to just through my audio play the main stage just so we know exactly where they're at and when people will be coming over? Or would you guys prefer just to kind of continue to chat amongst yourselves?
Oh, that'd be helpful, I think. Yeah.
I
I'll just
agree.
play the audio on that. Oh, and I should say they're watching a Be Local video right now, just in case you don't think I've now just pulled out my own music.
Just to Chris and Gail, I just put a link in there that you might be interested in. They're trying to add disability to the medical assistance.
Yeah, it's been on the news lately. Very cool.
Well, I don't know if it's cool because
Well, it's needed.
so that's been in legislation since 2016, but they're adding disability to that.
Yeah.
So that's not good because we're talking about that's the precursor. So I just thought you'd like to know that it would put a number to a person with a disability. If there's not enough services, that person could be seen as a liability and be on the way for the right to die without expressing. It's quite alarming. We already have the legislation. We don't, so I just want people to learn about that.
Except for that Saskatchewan farmer that had to take the life of his disabled daughter. That was heart-wrenching.
Yeah, Robert Latimer, yes.
Thanks for sharing that.
Can you hear that now? This is from the main stage.
No.
No, I hear you, Angie, but not the main stage.
Which I do have to say, it was hard to pull myself away from that Beyonce song.
Well, I'm not going to compete with that. I will not sing for you.
I was going to suggest that Megan just continue it.
Yes. The song does speak volumes.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just play the main feed. They're about to send people over.
Okay.
Wow, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Wow, it's I love a sunny Friday. It makes such a big difference, I think, to mood and to just our perspective on the day in general. And how about this morning? Thumbs up, medium thumbs. Any comments about this morning? I just thought, oof, that was a hard-hitting and awesome panel.
Yeah, Patti made some great points. Yeah.
She did, yeah.
Absolutely. I think what's really stuck with me is those arrows,
Mhm.
and how we are, not intentionally, but it's certainly happening, putting those arrows into people that they have to recover from at the end of each day. And to think about what kind of work that is, I think is such a good call to action for us here. So I'm so happy that you could join us for a brave discussion on governance today. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce our panel. I want you to check out their bios on SwapCard because they're pretty amazing bios. And I always get a little intimidated when I read their bios because they're just so awesome. So definitely read those. But I am going to ask each person to share a bit about themselves. And one of the tones I want to set today as well is about vulnerability. So if you could tell us how you are doing really in your response right now, that would also be pretty great. So I'm going to call Karen on you first.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Karen Ramchuk, and I am the president and CEO of WINS, or the Women in Need Society. For you that don't know, WINS is a social enterprise that has been in Calgary for close to 30 years. Annually, WINS helps 17,000 Calgarians that live in poverty, and our social enterprise pays for close to 80% of our community programs. So a little bit about me is I actually come from corporate retail, and the board recruited me to come in to help strengthen the social enterprise side of WINS, but which was a cool mix, and maybe it makes me a bit of a unicorn potentially, is my mom was a counselor at a women's shelter growing up, and I volunteered and ran the childcare program all through high school. So with that said, that's something a lot of people don't know about me. And as to how I'm doing with COVID, vulnerably and honestly, personally, I find it isolating. I find it really alone. I have an elderly mother who lives on Vancouver Island, who over the summer I was fortunate to get out to visit 3 times, but I'm not going for Christmas. It'll be the first Christmas I haven't spent with her in quite a few years. And unfortunately, it may be her last. So COVID is very impactful and very hard on me on a personal level. I also just had a dear friend pass away on Sunday. So very hard times for sure. With that said, though, the organization of WINS is doing quite well. We've been able to take some really hard pivots through COVID-19, and we didn't stop our programs at all through COVID. We just changed them, and we changed them overnight so that they were safe to operate. And we're just seeming to be moving forward in a very quick and helpful way. But from a business management perspective, it feels like through COVID, everything got kind of put on hold for 3 or 4 months. And then it's like all of a sudden everyone woke up and said, oh my goodness, it's October and we need to get everything completed for the year that we had planned to complete. And I'm not just talking about at WINS internally, I'm also talking external. So the virtual meeting fatigue is real, and you're called into a million meetings every day. Like my calendar's lucky to have time in it at all. But with that said, we're moving forward. And to be honest, I have to find the inner courage and strength just to be unapologetic if I can't attend things that I would normally attend and go to meetings I would normally go to. So Megan, that's kind of it. That's as honest and truthful as I can be.
Thank you for that, Karen. And I'm sorry about the loss that you've experienced. Grieving looks so very different right now, and harder. And thank you for sharing what I know a lot of us on this screen are experiencing, which is like fatigue mixed with a little panic that we have a year's worth of plans to somehow complete, even in this strange time. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the panel.
Thanks.
Oh, I'll turn it over to Gail now. Welcome.
Thanks. So I'm on the WINS board as well, or with WINS, but I'm on the board. I have a lot of governance background, many boards over many, many years. The notion of serving is really important to me, and I guess that I got that pretty early in my life about volunteering service, and that eventually took me to board service. So In terms of boards that recently, I was on the Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Commission until last year, and now I'm on WINS board, Mistakis Institute for the Rockies, and Calgary Co-op. So very, very different boards, but there's some pretty basic underlying governance principles, and it's interesting to see how those themes permeate across and manifest itself in different ways on every board. But I would say in terms of so for example, with the Calgary Co-op board, I haven't actually met a lot of my colleagues, the senior staff. So it's odd. It's very odd, and it's somewhat difficult. Personally, I find myself doing a lot of screen time, but COVID has not impacted my life very much. I'm an introvert. I kind of like being at home, so that part of it has worked fairly well for me. And I think with respect to some of the governance things, we'll get into some of that with the questions as we move forward. But what's happening in the community is happening on the boards, and there are really difficult human personnel issues out there that it's very, very hard to deal with virtually. And so that's been a big challenge and a risk.
And how are you feeling as you're navigating all of this?
Compassion, really, for the challenges and the people affected. That's probably the primary thing. Because personally, it's not about me. It's about how it's impacting the organization and others. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Gail. And Patti Dolan, happy to have you on the panel as well. I'm wondering if you can say a few words about yourself and how you're doing really.
You don't want to know that. Actually, so I'm Patti. I'm the chair of Vibrant Communities Calgary, and Megan is our executive director. And so we've had the pleasure of working together for the past year. And so Megan's onboarding kind of came at a really critical time here. So it's been an interesting year for sure. And I think to top that off, personally, I've had some interesting happenings. I had hip surgery last year that ended up with complications. And the day before I got my clearance that everything was okay, my husband had a major stroke. So he spent 3 months in the hospital, and the day that he got out of the hospital was the day that everything shut down due to COVID. So we've been kind of navigating this, the healthcare system through COVID, and but coming out of that, I'm very grateful that we had our health issues when we did, and not trying to deal with those, really serious issues through COVID. So I am trying to look at the situation with gratitude rather than, poor me. And so I guess I kind of translate that into my volunteer work, and my full-time job is actually a portfolio manager. So I've been dealing with clients and their emotional well-being as well as their financial well-being. So I've been, several hats are being worn over the last few months. And I think, fatigue would be a good term, but yeah, I'm just very privileged to, be part of the community. Gail was talking about being on boards, and, Karen talking about being a volunteer at a young age. My mom actually used to teach swimming for the mentally handicapped out of Vacova, which used to be called VRRI. And so I started teaching swimming at the age of 14. And so I've always volunteered. It was just part of our family, and we always gave back to the community. So I think if I wasn't on a board, I don't know what I would do with my spare time.
It makes me chuckle because, there's that phrase, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. And the idea that Patti even has any free time, I find really funny. As an ED, I've had to pull on her quite a bit during this time because there's a lot. So let's jump right into our panel. And I'm loving some of you are messaging me some questions privately and also posting. So feel free to use that as our chat. I'm gonna go around the panel and ask you for some reflections on what you heard this morning from our Great Lived Experience panel in terms of what they're experiencing in the social sector right now and what your biggest takeaways are from what you heard. So I'm gonna go to Karen first.
One of the things in the last conversation that I listened to and it gave me a moment to pause and to really think was the thought of the community hubs. Communities hubs are great, but there's no guiding force of community hubs. Anyone can open a community hub and put people in there. How do we unite together around community hubs to make sure that the right services and the right providers are in the right community hubs? How do you open a community hub? How do you do it as a community together as opposed to individual groups opening community hubs? It was just interesting for me. It gave me pause, it gave me thought, and it really made me want to spend some time when I have some coming up to really reflect on that. The other points of the conversation from this morning, it's just impactful for me, that lived experience. And I'm actually quite close to my frontline program team, and we spend a lot of time discussing clients. And I'm lucky I get to meet quite a few of our WINS clients. And I don't really think of them as clients. I just think of them as people that need some assistance at this time. And if we can get them their assistance and move them onward and upward, then I know that we're doing what we're meant to do.
And I love that framing, that you don't see them as clients necessarily, but as, people in your WINS community. And I think that framing is really critical to how we move forward as well. Thank you. Patti, what were some of your biggest takeaways from the session this morning?
Oh, there's probably three key things that I heard that were really powerful. Patti Poon's comments around the arrows, and that was just really heartfelt. And, I can't say I understand how she feels being a woman of color, but being a woman in a primarily male-dominated industry, I've experienced that being the only female in a room and having to hang out with the guys. So, to a certain point, I understand what the arrows can feel like, but not on a daily basis. So I was very moved with her comments and the reality of what she experiences. The others were from Sue Gwynn on the hubs, and the thought of just dropping a concept into a community and not following up. It's kind of like, when somebody travels to Africa and builds a school and builds the school but doesn't think of the maintenance or putting the teachers in or all the other follow-up that needs to be done. So that was a very powerful comment that she had. And Sean, I just love Sean. He's always got great perspective on issues, and he made the comment about working with rather than against. And I think that's something that's really being seen right now, is the partnerships and collaboration in the social sector, and the need for that is just has never been higher than right now. So that was a great comment on his part.
Thank you, Patti. And how about you, Gail? What were some of your biggest takeaways from this morning?
So the arrows were for me, I really caught that. But I think in terms of more of a general comment, the notion of marginalization takes many different forms. And I too am of a generation where gender was a big factor, and found myself being the only female in many male-dominated rooms, and have felt that sense of not fitting in, not being quite right. And I think as I listened to it and into the notion of marginalization, it's not just about, Well, marginalization, one of the comments was putting the agencies in places where people can't get at. That's marginalizing. It's about trying to bring people onto a board without giving them the background or skills to fit in properly. Or to contribute properly, not to fit in, but to contribute effectively. So I think there's a lot, like that marginalization piece, and it's really important. And I think we need to think a lot about that. And, or at least I feel I do. And I also thought that it was, you need to meet people where they're at and not where you think they should be, maybe is a better way of putting it. Not bad.
Amazing. Yeah, I think those are great points on marginalization, and it's interesting. We do have a couple of experts that are in our Zoom room who are real experts in decolonizing governance, because I think it starts there, and then it trickles to the rest of the organization, and then outward into community as well. One of the reasons we wanted to have WINS on this panel was because they sort of knew the meaning of the word pivot before it became part of our everyday language in this time of COVID. I was sad it didn't win Word of the Year, because I just thought, if I hear pivot one more time, anyway. I think one of the things that we're asking people to consider are, how do you start to make, as a board and as leadership, some really hard and difficult decisions about what you're doing and what your future is really. So beyond the board evaluation, beyond the executive director's report to the board, how do you know how you're having an impact, and how do you know if you really need to change? So Karen, I think I'll start with you. If you could briefly talk about maybe what you stepped into when you joined WINS, and then Gail, I'll move it over to you for that board perspective as well.
Sounds good. So when I began at WINS in 2017, I was actually recruited for the board for the social enterprise expertise. The organization was failing. The cost of doing business was growing in the city. Minimum wage had jumped dramatically up to $15 an hour. And carbon tax was implemented, and WINS runs a fleet of trucks, so gas prices went up. And the organization just was really, really struggling. The assets were getting old, and it was getting hard. In 2017, the organization lost $680,000. In 2018, that I really concentrated that year on social enterprise, and we actually changed out in 2018 the entire senior leadership team at WINS, simply because we couldn't afford them, not because they weren't good people doing good work. We just simply couldn't afford those roles. So we cut back the senior level. And in 2018, with a slow addition of a couple key leadership roles, we actually broke even in 2018. In 2019, the organization really started to come into its own again, and we were able to recapture money into our reserves, and we put $680,000 back into the organization in 2019. It was a very, very challenging time for WINS as an organization, and the first thing we had to do was get that social enterprise running right, and then we needed to go from there to starting to decide what the future for WINS is and what we want to look like and how we want to continue to develop and grow our programs. Right now, before COVID, WINS serves just over 10%, close to 12% of the population of people living in poverty in the city, which is quite a substantial amount. And the benefit of being that social enterprise is we get to pivot our programs exactly to the need in community as it arises. So we're not locked in by funders and by contracts telling us what we have to do. We're able to do what we want to do. So I know, Megan, you said just talk about my history through my time, but I'd like to talk about when COVID happened for a moment. Because that was a hard time for our organization. But one of the things we were determined to do at WINS was to keep our programs up and running, but to respond to community. So we were able to work with Alberta Health Services and bring all of our programs into one building, start to offer phone and virtual service delivery. But if you don't know WINS, one of the things we're strong in is providing basic needs. So we do emergency food, clothing, furniture, hygiene items. So we wanted to offer that up through COVID because almost every other organization shut down that part of what they were doing. And even the food bank had a hard shift there and made some changes. So we were able to pull a team of our core employees together, whether from programs or not from programs, and launch a curbside pickup for basic needs items, which was a big change for us. And then Alberta Health Services also made us close our stores, which is our major revenue supply. So again, terrifying for us. So through COVID, we looked for new sources of revenue. So if you didn't hear, through COVID, we launched 2 new businesses. So if you haven't looked them up, check them out. They're on our website. They are called The More Store and Twice New.
Amazing. You know, what I love about this this example is that, you know, you couldn't have known you were preparing to be agile in a pandemic, but you actually set your organization up to be as agile as you could be in a pandemic to, you know, better service the needs of clients. And like that kind of foresight is pretty incredible if you think about it. And it was a really long road to get there. And so, Gail, I wonder if I can turn it to you in terms of, you know, what some of those brave and hard conversations looks like at a board level. Before you brought Karen in, where the organization was at, struggling from what I understand. Lots of organizations are in that place right now. So what were some of your conversations at the board level around this?
So first I need to clarify, I've only been on the board since, what was it, Karen, May? April. So I wasn't part of some of those conversations, but I'm certainly aware of them. And I think the biggest challenge was during the transition, the board had to become quite engaged in operations. And in fact, one of the board members actually assumed the ED role for a bit. And I think the real challenge that I see now is backing out of that and being able to rebuild the governance structure that needs to be in place for a relatively complex organization, large organization. And I think it's once a board has been involved that deeply in operations, it becomes very, very difficult not to ask those questions. And so we have a transitional board where some of us have come on since then. We're operating very much at a governance level. And I think we were brought on intentionally for that, but it's hard for some of those that have been through that. And I think in terms of COVID, I want to talk about that for just a second because the impact, so we're still recovering from the operational transition. We're just barely getting back on our feet. Then COVID hit, and it becomes at some point, how much more can you ask your team to do? More with less. And at what time does it just simply become too much? You can't sustain that level forever. And I think as a board, we need to be very aware of our impact on the information that we're asking for. And a board should never be afraid to ask for information, but understanding how much do you actually need to discharge your duties. So there's a few pieces that we're still working out on that. Thanks.
Love that. And I think that's really something we want to tease out, which is what are some of the questions boards have gotten out of the habit of asking themselves, and how can we ask those questions a little better? Patti, I'd love to get some of your reflections on what you've just heard in terms of governance and asking some of those brave questions.
Well, Megan and I kind of talked prior to this session, and I had an experience years ago, one of the first boards I was on that had a pet project that was going to bankrupt the organization. And so my background is I'm a portfolio manager, so I look at businesses, as a financial well-being, if they're a healthy institution or not. And so I kind of framed it to the board that if I was looking at this as an investment, I would run away. And so yeah, I was not popular, but we did drop the pet project, and they focused more on the mission statement of what the organization was really supposed to be doing. And I think, that happens on boards is they can tend to drift. And somebody put in the chat box here about don't let a crisis go to waste, right? And so I think that's, what's happening right now. Our boards are having to reevaluate, what they're doing, when they're doing it, and how they're doing it. Are they duplicating somebody else's efforts? Is this an opportunity to look at joining forces? Question, is anyone going to miss us? If we shut down tomorrow, would our services be missed in the community? So those are really hard questions that boards are going to have to ask, I think, through the next little while. And look at kind of reframing, with vibrant communities. The original poverty reduction strategy was initially set up as the CPRI and then morphed into the Enough for All strategy. And it was excellent for that point in time. But we realized over, a number of years that we were missing some really key areas that, was overlooked in the original strategy. So last year we did a refresh of the strategy, and it was a 2.0, we called it. And we added levers of change. So it was something that, could be applied in a whole bunch of different areas. And so with that, we were able to set ourselves up really well, actually, for COVID. And also the hiring of Megan and her background really blended into opportunities that we didn't perceive in a year ago or even at the beginning of the year. So.
Patti. So a lot of people have been messaging me questions directly. So I want to definitely get into some of those. And these are all great framings for those questions. So Tim Fox has, I think, what is a really important question for us right now, particularly in this time of COVID. Considering our evolving times around social justice, are you making space at the board level for learning and unlearning? I think that's a really important word here for learning and unlearning on these social issues, but more importantly, the responsibility that we have to address those issues. So I'm going to put that in the chat, and I'm going to invite the panelists to answer that, but I would also invite others if they have thoughts and perspectives to answer that as well. So maybe Karen, I'll put that one over to you first.
So I would actually almost want to defer this over to Gail. What is interesting at WINS, we are actually, as she said, really working on rebuilding our governance structure at WINS. But one of the things that we've been talking about I've been talking with the governance committee about is what key learning sessions we need for the board over the next year. Because we agree that there's so much going on. There's things that the board needs to learn. I love the unlearning word. I think that's a great concept as well. I just want to look at the questions. And then the responsibility that the board has to address the issues. Well, for me, when I think of our board of directors, I think, who does the board of directors really answer to? And for me, it's the key external stakeholders. So at WINS, it's the people that choose to donate product to us. It's the customers that shop in the stores, and it's the people that receive the help through the programs. So for me, that's really why the learning and unlearning, and that's where the responsibility ends. If we're not doing the right things for all of those key external stakeholders were not on track. So with that said, Megan, if you're okay, I'm going to throw it over to Gail intentionally.
So, making space for learning is not easy, especially when you're trying to rebuild a governance structure and you're, up to your eyeballs in bylaws and policies and all those fun things that are really important. But we have been talking about a learning plan. We also have been talking about diversity. And when you're talking about diversity, we also, it's not, there's a lot of learning and unlearning that has to be done around diversity. It's a challenging time, a challenging topic, and at this point, I'm not talking about wins, but I have been absolutely dumbfounded with people who really don't get it at all, particularly around Aboriginal issues and the unlearning. And it's a challenge I haven't experienced that. I have some understanding, but it's mostly from what I've learned and unlearned, and taking online courses and doing the diversity training and all those good things, which I've done for years. But the ability to actually, when somebody says that's bullshit, and you're sitting there thinking, how do I even respond to that? And I need tools to deal with that. I can't imagine how people of color are dealing with some of it, because I actually don't really know how to deal with some of that. And I think for somebody like myself, who is coming from a background where I had very little information and am learning quickly and very supportive of these changes, it is extremely challenging when you walk into a room. It reminds me of being back in the day where I was the only woman in the room. And here I am in a situation where I'm having to speak up. And feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I'm going to continue going for a minute. That being silent, trying to figure it out, is not an option anymore. And so I need the skills, I need the tools, and I often need support in understanding that. So I know these things have been there probably for a long time, but I think what's happening now is that people are actually saying things that I have never heard before, and I find it astonishing. So coming back to WINS board, diversity is not just diversity of thought. It's about people's experience and perspective that they bring to the board table. I have been on boards where we were mandated to have a client on the board, and I've seen that poor person marginalized beyond belief. That's not productive either. We need to give people the skills, just like I'm saying about myself and how I manage and deal when I'm confronted with people who are idiots. And I'll own that, uninformed idiots. And when we bring people onto the board, we need to give them the background skills to be successful. And that both pieces are really important. And we've got a lot of work to do. And I'm sorry to say, I had no idea until probably the last 2 years. It has become quite obvious how much work has to be done. So, sorry about going down that rabbit hole.
No, I actually really love that rabbit hole, and it speaks to some of the questions I'm getting as well in the chat in terms of let's dig in a little further on some of the questions and conversations that boards have had to have and hopefully have had around Black Lives Matter, about meaningful inclusion in terms of equity seeking communities. And this is a very active side of the chat I'm having right now with some folks. You bring up an interesting point, Gail, which is sometimes you bring people into sort of like a very Western kind of operating board and they feel uncomfortable. And then because that's not an inclusive or appropriate space. So I'm going to throw this to the panel, but I'd love to hear also if there's others on the chat here in our Zoom room who have experience in the conversation. Are you having conversations, hard conversations, about how welcome someone from the Black community, for example, the LGBTQTS community, how welcome they are on your board, how inclusive your board is to those conversations and perspectives, truly, and what that looks like. So I'm gonna throw that to the panel first, and then I'd love to hear from others if you're comfortable sharing.
So Megan, I'm almost dancing in my seat because I want to answer this so badly. So I'm going to talk again about myself. Oh, that sounds so rude. For 10 seconds at the onset of this. There's some things about me not many people know. One is that I had an Indigenous sister growing up who was fostered by my parents. The other thing that I had growing up was my brother's best friend, who was a permanent fixture in our house, was from Africa. So for me, I grew up with diversity all around me. When I got to WINS, because of the people that come to WINS, whether to shop, to donate, or to receive help, it's a whole pool of all different people as well. Diversity and inclusion for me and for WINS is such a natural part of who we are. When it comes to our board, we haven't had the hard conversations, and I believe it's honestly kind of because we don't need them, because it's just part of the culture of WINS. When we go to recruit new board members, we look at skill set that they bring. We don't look at, is their skin a different color? We look at their fit for the organization. We try to make sure that they fit what the organization needs at that time. It's not somebody's friend being brought onto the board. It's, we have a need. We want a different perspective. And it's not always even about their skills in their day job. It's what perspective can they bring to the WINS board, which I think is one of the things that makes me love WINS as much as what I do. So sorry, I just had to answer that.
That's great. I wonder, Patti, if I could turn it to you for a sec, because one of the unique parts of the Vibrant Communities Calgary governance model is that it's very important to us to have lived experience of poverty on our board. And so we bring that representation as a formal board position through our Poverty Talks Committee. And similarly from the Indigenous Advisory Committee perspective as well. We've realized, I think, particularly from the perspective of poverty, that that's kind of unique. So it's kind of the people that you're supporting being on your board as well, but really very critical in terms of keeping the organization honest and making sure that the who are being served are actually being served, because there's many layers that happen before the board gets the information. So Patti, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that really attracted me to the board. And Poverty Talks has a saying that, don't make the decisions for us without us. And so that's so important to have the lived experience on the board, so that we have that insight. I mean, I have experienced poverty in my younger years, but currently I'm not experiencing poverty, and I don't know what the issues are in the community. So it's vital that we have that pulse on the community. And for the Indigenous Advisory Council, again, the Indigenous representation in poverty is much higher than any other cultural group out there. And so it's super important to have that insight. And also what we've done on the board is worked through reconciliation to better understand what the history is and what the ongoing issues are in the Indigenous community, and having that sensitivity to our decision making, and also the difference in governance in the Indigenous culture also, and being able to adapt that into our governance. So it's been an amazing opportunity, and probably the biggest highlight is working through reconciliation. Unfortunately, last year because we were working on the refresh for the strategy, that did get put on the back burner, and we had some great plans this year to do more reconciliation work, but with COVID, that was put on hold, and we're looking at implementing it again next year. So the it is an active board. We're not a passive board. We don't just sit there and do our kind of governance agenda through our meetings. It's there's a lot of input on what the current issues are and how we can adapt to that. So when we do, we always have about 2 board positions that come available each year. And so we look each year and we do a matrix of the board, what areas do we need help in? What is, a current issue that we should have somebody on the board that has that experience that can help us out. So our board is ever changing, and it's a wonderful experience to be on this board. So I always describe it, I write right-handed, but I always feel like I'm writing left-handed when I'm on this board.
Thanks, Patti. I didn't know that about you. I think, yeah, I would love to hear. So you can just tell me in the chat or give a reaction on your screen. Others who maybe have or are struggling to have those conversations at the board level around, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot this year in terms of inequity. We've had conversations about representation and anti-racism. If there's anyone else that's got that perspective that they'd love to share, we'd love to hear from you as well. One of the questions I liked that we asked in HR and governance at the VCC board was like, are we friendly? Is this a friendly space? Is this an accommodating, safe, and welcoming space if you are not from the dominant narrative, right? And I think that is such a key question that boards need to truly be asking themselves, and to explore the different ways of governance that are out there and readily accessible, right? If we want to ask ourselves those questions as well. Do you have anyone that wants to share an experience on their board? And there's lots happening in the chat here as well. All right. I will ask a question that's just come up from, whoop, sorry, that's my dog. This is COVID, folks. We're all just working from home with our dogs on our laps. Chris has a great question here around whether this group knows of any organizations that have more diverse boards that are more successful than those that are not. It's a good question, Chris. Does anyone on the panel or anyone in the room have an answer to that?
Sounds like it would be a really good thesis paper.
This is not really, like, I do have a bit of an answer, but not really in the nature of the question. When I was on Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Board, in the province, we have First Nations casinos, and there was no, so the board can't have clients, licensees on the board for obvious reasons. If you're a regulatory organization, you can't having people who are being regulated in charges a conflict. And but having diversity on the board was a goal, and we did achieve that, and it did make a difference. I will tell a very quick, so it's not directly about being more successful. I think it's also about having perspective and understanding of the impact of the decisions being made. And I think because we had that level of diversity on the board, we made better decisions. I'll also add that, no, I'll leave that part for now. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Tim, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
For sure, happy to share some insights. I don't mean to sort of insert myself into the conversation either, but the question was sort of reflecting on Chris's thought around the diversity of boards and experiencing more success. Was that the question? Yeah, so I feel like I have sort of just a minor piece of experience. So I'm the chair of the Circle on Philanthropy and Aboriginal Peoples in Canada Board of Directors. And I'm on the senior leadership team at the Calgary Foundation. So I have the opportunity to be in two spaces, two governing board spaces. So I have, you know, for the most part, for the Calgary Foundation, it's very, it includes that dominant narrative that we were talking about. It includes a lot of room for growth and a lot of room for change. But then I sort of reflect on my board experience on the Circle board, where 50% of our board members are of Indigenous descent. There is one board member who identifies as a settler. The rest are people of color, of women. We just went through a board recruitment process where we specifically invited those individuals who have an interest in board development and who also identify as Black, Indigenous, or queer, or people of color. So we're very we feel like we are being inviting with that invitation. I feel like the dominant narrative of boards might struggle with even using some of that language, feeling uncomfortable to sort of call out race and invite specific races and intersecting identities to apply to these positions. So what I know is that both the Calgary Foundation Board is experiencing a lot of progress, a lot of learning, a lot of unlearning. Simultaneously, my experience on this more diverse board at the Circle has always upheld, the strength and diversity of thought, the strength and diversity of lived experiences, and of those people who are made vulnerable by society, like Black, Indigenous, people of color, all that kind of stuff. So we've always done that. And we're actually sort of partnering with Statistics Canada to capture some of this data when it comes to representation on board governance for a couple of reasons. We feel like the story is going to be like, yeah, this is problematic behavior. The majority of boards typically recruit those of a dominant background, of a dominant perspective, usually of settler descent, of a particular gender, of a particular generation, all that kind of stuff. So we're expecting sort of that story to be told. On the flip side, we're also expecting the story to be told that the very thing we're trying to encourage for boards and for organizations when they talk about diversity and inclusion, that we're going to find that Indigenous-led boards and these boards who welcome diversity and who have always done this, have been doing this work for generations and decades. So I also want to tell that story, that it's not new, it's not a new concept or a new thing, that it's existed and it's actually worked very well for these organizations. They still grapple because they're not prioritized as much as mainstream organizations. And in fact, sometimes we have to make more of a justification for needing some of the funds that are out there and all that kind of stuff. And mind you, this is coming from a perspective of someone who works for a settler-created philanthropic funder. And so we are also trying to navigate ways at the Calgary Foundation to be better and to fill those gaps and all that kind of stuff. So really long-winded way of reflecting on that thought, but hopefully that was helpful.
It's incredible. And Tim, since you're here, I'm wondering if I can ask, because the learning kind of active piece, boards have very different definitions of that, and it kind of happens in different ways. The unlearning, I think, is incredibly powerful. So can you point to one or two areas that boards should look at unlearning, the dominant narrative boards, and what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I feel like when it comes to unlearning, we prioritize one way of doing life, one way of doing business, and that's sort of the status quo, this Eurocentric approach, this Western approach that's very linear, where we have the structure of our boards. And it's really sort of interesting when I'm in the spaces of a dominant board versus the spaces of a more inclusive board, where they are fully on, like Mr. Chair, can I speak? And there's this language and there's this hierarchy of like power in communication that exists, and it's really sort of, well, for me, uncomfortable, but I understand that that's the structure that we operate in at a board level. So when I talk about unlearning, I'm really interested in boards seeking the knowledge of reimagining governance and not sort of holding on to this one way of Western linear thinking. That's designing for comfort. That's very comfortable for boards to sort of have, a chair holding the space, using some of that really paternalistic language. That's comfortable. The moment we begin to start talking about, like, at the circle board, we don't we use seasonal governance planning. So we base our planning questions on what the questions that we're asking for that season, and themed out those seasons. For summertime, it's a time for tending to our relationships. And as a board, we ask ourselves, what are those relationships we have to focus on and center? And what are those relationships that we have to let go of that are sort of not really doing anything for us? For the fall, it's about tending to our harvest. So as a board, we're asking ourselves, what is the information that we need to help prepare ourselves? What can we harvest to help prepare ourselves for the work we are doing in the wintertime, which is tending to our fire? So for the wintertime, what do we as a board need to focus on for the year ahead or end of year? And what can we sort of leave in the fire? So things like that, it's not, to me, it's not a huge stretch. People might think of it as unconventional learning. I just feel like it's fostering a more holistic approach that has been very beneficial for us. So learning that there are different ways to govern and lead, different ways of knowing, being, and then hopefully doing. We're leaning on the legacies of Indigenous paradigm of thought and practice. So, yeah.
That is incredibly powerful, Tim. And the question I'm going to ask the other panelists is, if you could give this group one question that your board should be asking themselves right now, that would be great. And Tim, I sort of love the idea of each board going to itself and saying, what are the things that we need to unlearn in order to create the way to learn and do in a different way? So
can I just really quickly speak to David's question around the spring? So the springtime is about tending to the soil. And the questions that we ask are, what are the seeds of change we wish to plant for our board, our organization, or our members? What are the emerging trends to note, engage with, and acknowledge? And then how can we tend to our soil for what's to come? So in the springtime, it's about tending to our soil.
And at VCC, we use that as well in some of our work in terms of the seasonal planning, because it's a different way to approach work, right? And I think makes a lot more sense, actually. Awesome. So Patti, I'm going to turn it to you. What is one question, in addition to what do we need to unlearn as boards? What's one question that you would encourage this group to ask its board moving forward?
Oh boy, how can we do this differently? Really, I mean, it's very simplistic, but I just love what Tim had to say. That's just brilliant. And I'm ready to burn my Robert's rules now. But I mean, that's, I've been on boards that it's incredibly top heavy around that. And I appreciate, the learning that you have to do to be on a board, and the unlearning of the traditional ways that we've done it, be open to change. And I think this year, that's what 2020 has been all about, be open to change.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm laughing because I know that Jenny, and I think she put it here too, Jenny actually runs this incredible workshop on decolonizing governance. And you leave there a little bit allergic to the Robert's Rules of Order. It's pretty, it's pretty powerful. Gail, what would you say is a question that boards should be asking themselves right now?
I think that an important piece is coming from a perspective of service. So whether it be a volunteer organization, or AGLC or Calgary Co-op, it's all about what am I bringing, how am I serving my community, or in WINS in particular, how am I serving the community, the people in need, and what value do I bring? to the board, and how can I best do that? So to Tim's point about power, if it's about power, I think there is a problem. It is about hierarchy, and it is a paradigm that, in my perspective, needs to go away. I twice found myself in situations where the position I held did have a lot of power, and the problem for me is that I didn't understand my impact on other people, and I would say something. Sometimes you just say things, and it would be interpreted as a direction or an order or whatever. And for me, if it's not about serving, if it's not about community, if it's not coming from a good place, which I don't think a power structure does, then it's probably not the right place for me anyway. Yeah, so service, and that's a bit of a different way again to try to view what you're bringing to the board and how the board needs to operate, how we best serve. And that ties into mission, vision, values, and lots of times you come in with very concrete decisions that you have to make, and liability issues. It always must come back to mission, vision, and values, and then your strategic direction.
Awesome. Thank you, Gail. And Karen, I'll throw it to you too. And recognizing that Karen and I kind of have, we're not on our boards, but we have a relationship to give board information and to also ask questions to the board. So what's a question that you would recommend?
First off, I thought that both Patti and Gail had fabulous answers to this question. And for me, what it really comes down to is times are different. COVID has had an impact. The title for this morning is twice the need and half of the money. So for me, the question that comes to me is, how can we ensure that our impact is strong, potentially even stronger than it previously was, when obviously half the money resources are strapped? And what are we going to do? How can we change to be more efficient and effective so that we can concentrate on that impact? That's kind of where I went on that one.
Very cool. Thank you for that. And I'll build on that a little bit too. And if there's any sort of leadership folks in the room who get to have the privilege of, working directly with their board, I think it's on us to think about what information we're presenting and how we're presenting it and what that looks like, in order to be a translator of what the community experience is to our boards of directors as well. Amazing. This has been such an active session. I love it. There's so much happening there in the chat as well. We are committed to taking these notes and also summarizing them and hopefully providing some good links. I want to thank Patti, Karen, Gail, Tim as well so much for your wisdom and thoughts and advice for us. This is a really cool discussion, and I hope that it brought some conversations and questions to your own mind that you can bring forward with your boards. We are going to head over to a movement moment, which is happening now on the main stage. And I'm just going to throw that link to Swap Card right there at the bottom so everyone has it really easily. And then we're going to go into mixed breakout group discussions with people from the other breakout as well, so we can talk about how to move this conversation further even more. So thank you all, and go check out, I think it's jazz today. Check out some jazz over on Swap Card.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.